Do you want to communicate better with people? Make them feel like you're really listening. I mean, hopefully you are really listening, but make them feel like connected, like you're engaged, like you're like really in on this conversation with them. It's a good goal. So maybe you go out and you start to learn about body language and nonverbal cues. You read, you watch example videos, you're just like really digging into how to become a better communicator. And you come across this handy little trick that says, you know what you need to do? You need to do the triple nod. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The triple nod. Have you heard of it? Have you seen the viral stat about it? I have, like a bunch. I've seen it a bunch. The usefulness of the viral nod is, in fact, a stat that has been circulating since at least 2014, y'all. That's over a decade. It graced my social media feeds this past week via a clip from the Diary of a CEO podcast. They had Vanessa Van Edwards, a body language expert, on to talk about warmth cues to help people warm up to you. She said, and I quote, "Research has found that if we do a slow triple nod, the other person speaks 67% longer." Whenever someone refers to ambiguous research or researchers or studies that are finding something with no name of a researcher given, no publication cited, and basically no other details, I'm immediately skeptical. Throw in a precise number like 67%, and like my spidey senses are tingling. I needed to know, is this legit? So, welcome back. Welcome to this week's episode of Is This Legit? Research Reality Check with me, your host, Dr. Kirsten Lee Hill. Let's dig in. I did as I do when I see stats on the internet that I'm not really sure are true, and I go straight to Google. Y'all, look, love me some Google, wanted to look it up. And for 1 hour, I tried to find the origins of this stat. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? Unlike all the episodes you have heard up until now, I did not find where this stat came from. So instead today, we are going to go on a little journey so I can tell you what I found instead and underscore the importance of sharing sources and not trusting everything you hear on the internet, including if it's from someone who says they're an expert, who looks, walks, talks, and acts like an expert. In this case, this expert who appeared on the Diary of a CEO podcast also appeared on the Mel Robbins podcast. The episode was shared to YouTube on January 10th of this year, 2025, as part of their How Can You Become More Charismatic video. Here's the direct quote. By the way, funny thing about this, the research found that when someone does a slow triple nod, mm-hmm, 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 the other person speaks 67% longer. It's like a nonverbal ... You're literally saying to someone, tell me more. I want to listen. I want to hear you. Yet again, no further details on this mysterious research, leaving me saying, tell me more. I want to listen. I want to hear you. Drop the name of the study that the 67% came from. In a YouTube video from the speaker's organization posted on March 21st, 2023, the claim shifted ever so slightly. Direct quote, they found that if someone does a triple nod, the other person speaks 3 to 4 times longer. This 3 to 4 times claim also appeared on the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership podcast posted on June 21st, 2022. Direct quote, research finds that the slow triple nod gets the other person to speak 3 to 4 times longer. Yes, there was a demonstration of the slow triple nod in there, and I just don't want to keep having to do it for you all. So you can imagine someone demonstrating the slow triple nod. Back in 2016, the same expert penned a Time magazine article that lists the triple nod as one of the 7 body language tips everyone should know. This time, interestingly, the stat is nowhere to be found. Instead, in the section on the triple nod, they are referencing Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Weird, right? Or should I say, suspicious. Traveling even further back in time to March 23rd, 2014, Lifehacker, a website, posted a video with the speaker claiming again, direct quote, research shows that when you nod 3 times after someone is done speaking, they will speak 3 to 4 times longer. Look, y'all, in case you haven't caught the drift, this stat, this fact, some variation of this slow triple nod getting people to speak longer has been making its rounds for over a decade. At this point, I finally thought I had for sure found the source. The Science of People organization, founded by the speaker, has an article dated July 2nd, 2024, and it's called Mirroring Body Language: 4 Steps to Successfully Mirror Others. And it has sources cited in it, like real sources. It has a source list at the end. You can Google them, you can look them up, you can read the actual research that they're citing. I was like, we got this. Thank you. We have found it. Took a little bit longer than I thought it would, but here we are. We have arrived at the truth. Go into the article and again, find the section on the triple nod. Direct quote: research shows when you do the triple nod, the other person will speak 3 to 4 times longer, making them feel listened to and important. And then there is what I had been searching to, a little footnote that's hyperlinked that's going to take me to the source of this fun fact. When I tell you that the hyperlink just takes you to the exact article that I was currently reading, yeah. That's fun. So I scroll down, I'm like, okay, maybe it was just like a goof. Sometimes you try to link to something later on the page, it's funny. So I go to the citation list and I look up every single source in that list, and not one of them is about a triple nod. Not one of them is even about nodding at all. And again, just to emphasize, it's not like there aren't sources cited in this article for other aspects of body language that are discussed, because there are. And they have a citation list at the end of the article. They also have a note, and it says, side note, as much as possible, we tried to use academic research or expert opinion for this master body language guide. Occasionally, when we could not find research, we include anecdotes that are helpful. As more research comes out on a nonverbal behavior, we will be sure to add it. Weird, right? We have an oddly specific stat that's like going viral today, 67%, which, like, when we're tracing it back, it says 3 to 4 times. The math isn't mathing, as I like to say. But so we have like this oddly specific thing circulating and not a source to be found, even in places where other similar claims are getting research to back them up. This one is not. And yet, when the speaker is going on podcasts to speak about this, research finds, research finds, research finds. Does research find? Because I can't find the research. So what makes today's episode different is that normally I find the research and we dig into it. We talk about whether, given the full context of the study and what you see about who's in the study and what type of data they collected and where they collected it and when they collected it and why they collected it, if you consider all those things together, do you still feel like this stat, this fact is truth? We can't do that today because I cannot find the actual study. I personally am like leaning towards a study doesn't exist like this. Maybe it does. An hour is like my limit, y'all. An hour is my limit for looking up potentially completely made up facts. It should never take over an hour to fact check a scientific claim. If you are not like a peer reviewer, a dissertation chair whose job it is to check over someone's analyses for accuracy, it should not be taking an hour to verify that something is true. If someone is presenting a specific number or fact or finding or claim, they should be able to cite their source and they should do it. Period. End of sentence. Like, I don't want to hear your excuses. It is irresponsible to not share that information with your audience. The reason I'm so passionate about this is because when unverified claims like this spread, they undermine trust in actual research, in actual science, and that trust is really difficult to rebuild. I think about how much like I, a researcher, have lost trust in science over the past 5 years as politics have played an increasingly bigger role in science. Like, it's terrifying to me. Like, I always tell people, I'm like, I don't trust anything anymore. And it's because my trust in science has been so eroded that I've now started a podcast where I neurotically pick apart stats on the internet because I don't know what truth is anymore. And this could all be avoided if people would just be like, hey, this is where this stat, fact, figure finding came from. let me tell you a little bit more about it so you have the full context. So you as a person hearing this information can make a decision about whether you think what I'm saying is accurate, whether you think what I'm saying is credible, whether you think what I'm saying is relevant and meaningful to you. The lack of transparency in the instance of the 67% stat is concerning to me. I want to take a minute and name right here that episodes like this make me really nervous. Like when I saw this stat and realized I couldn't trace it down, I was like, oh, like I don't even know if I want to do an episode about this because I am a teeny tiny creator. And oftentimes, in my experience, the people who are using these stats without backing them up are big creators with big platforms. That's scary to me. It's also uncomfortable to me because I don't want to lob a personal attack against anyone. You'll notice that I say this speaker's name exactly one time in this episode because it's not really about this one speaker. They are emblematic of a much larger problem, which is to say, like, it's not personal. This person is just an example of something that happens again and again and again, and they just happen to be the latest example that like came across my screen. The point I want to make is this: when you are an influencer, when you are speaking on the internet, in the news, on podcasts, whatever the platform, you have an obligation to fact check yourself and be transparent with information. For everyone listening who consumes information, the takeaway is no matter how expert someone appears or how true something sounds, you should always be checking for the source to back the claims up. This is like base level responsibility for sharing information. And unfortunately, the sharers of information are sleeping on the job. So, as someone who consumes information, you must take it upon yourself to verify the information. We're picking up their slack, y'all, and it's not fair. But if you want to go about and be truly informed and make decisions or form beliefs based on real information and the reality around you, this is just something you have to do. And we've discussed it in other episodes. You have to dig into the full context of the study: who, what, when, where, and why. Again, in this case, with this using the slow triple nod to get people to speak longer, we can't do that because the study is missing in action. It's nowhere to be found. I do want to be clear that I'm not saying definitively, like 100% certain, cross my heart, that this study doesn't exist. Maybe there is a niche study out there buried with bad SEO, which means search engines like Google just like can't pick it up, can't find it. But even if there is, that doesn't change how I feel about this. Like sharing stats without proper citations, without sharing where they came from and the full context of the stat, is spreading misinformation, and it's harmful. In this case, like, it's about a nod. You know, like, do I think the triple nod is going to harm someone? Like, probably not. But still, like, people might be like going about doing the triple nod or telling people at work or their friends or their family about the triple nod, thinking that it's scientifically proven, only to find out that it's like just someone's opinion. So, how do we find ourselves in this situation? How do we end up with a super specific stat about triple nodding? For instance, here's a possible situation: an observation, maybe in one conversation you've had, or maybe over like years of having many, many conversations, gets generalized. Someone notices that as they're talking to people, they tend to speak longer if they're nodding. They decide to turn that into a helpful little tip. If you slowly nod 3 times, people talk longer. And then over time, to make it sound more official or credible, a number gets added. Maybe it's based on a guess. Maybe it's based on a small unpublished study, right? And it's like, oh, people speak 3 to 4 times longer. Then that 3 to 4 times changes to 67%. Maybe. It's like this shift from framing something as like an opinion, even an expert opinion, right? To framing it as something that is backed by science, to framing it as something that is backed by science with a number that makes it sound like really good advice. Numbers like this can jump out to people and stick in their mind because they sound really precise and they sound like real science. They're easy to repeat and they're harder to question. Let's say you go to a body language expert because you want to learn how to communicate better, and you're like, I noticed that when someone's talking to me, they're giving like really short answers and I would like to hear more. And the expert says to you, if you want them to speak longer, just slowly nod 3 times. And they demonstrate how to do the nod and like, okay, so that's the advice. Now imagine you go to the same expert and instead they present the advice to you and they say, research has shown that if you slowly nod 3 times, people will speak 3 to 4 times longer. Which piece of advice would go over better with you? Which would you take more seriously? Like, really take a minute and think to yourself, answer that question. Reach out and tell me your answer. I'd love to hear it. Numbers give people something to latch on to. And, like, in short, in my opinion, it's good marketing. But in this instance, like, good marketing, bad science, because it is unclear that it is based on real science. I'm a big believer in, like, if you are sharing a personal observation, even as an expert, like, just say it. Just be like, hey, I'm an expert on body language. And I notice that in conversations, when I slowly nod 3 times, people talk longer. So give it a try. Maybe it'll work for you. Like, that's fine. I have no problem. Say that. Say the truth, right? Like, don't turn this into a statistic unless you have the evidence to back it up. And just for the record, there is actual research on nodding, okay? When I was digging into this, there have been studies on the role of like nodding in jury like trials, the role of nodding in virtual reality, the effects of teacher nodding, the role that nodding plays in intercultural conversations, the role that nodding can play as someone like speaking versus someone listening. And there's even an article from the 80s about how a rapid triple head nod can indicate impatience. So, like, there are studies on nodding. Do any of them indicate that a triple nod will result in someone speaking longer? No. And just to like further underscore how like easy it is for like misinformation like this to spread, I asked ChatGPT, and Google has its new like AI thing about this stat, and both of them gave me a few studies to support it. That if you dig into those studies, you will see that is not what they say. They do not have the stat. They do not even support nodding as a good tool in conversation. So when I say question everything, like, I mean question everything, right? If something gets said enough on the internet, like this 67% 3 to 4 times situation, it starts to show up in AI models as truth. It's wild. It's wild. It's wild. So y'all, none of the studies that I could find give any evidence that a triple head nod will lead to someone speaking for longer, let alone 67% longer or 3 to 4 times longer, depending on which stat you want to go with. It doesn't mean that it's bad advice, but it does mean that it does not appear that this advice is supported by scientific evidence. Maybe one of y'all listening can design a study to figure out if this is true or not. And like, as I say that, I'm starting to think through like what you would need to do to be able to do this study. And it's like, oh, this would actually be kind of complicated. When people are talking to me, I naturally nod. And I just can imagine like how difficult it would be to try to count how many times I'm nodding as someone's talking to me. And then suddenly I'm like not seeming like I'm paying that much attention to them because I'm in my head trying to count my nods for this study. It just makes me think, like, in this possibly made up study that I can't find, how did they do this head nodding thing? Like, did they observe people in conversation and count how many times they nodded their head over a period of a certain amount of time? And then the average of that was like 3, and that's how they got to 3 and speaking longer. Like, I imagine that it took videoing or watching and a timer and some instructions about head nods or just natural head nod observation. Like, do you see all the things that would go into this? If this was a real study, wouldn't you also want to know these things? I would. Food for thought. Food for thought. Context matters. I would really want to know how they designed this head nodding study if it exists. Just saying. But I digress. Here are my 3 takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, be transparent. If your claims are based on your personal experience, just say so. Do not hide behind vague references to research. Number 2, cite your sources. If you are sharing a fact, and I say fact Because you say stat and people think numbers only, right? Because a stat, it would be numbers. Fact, whether it's a number or a non-number finding truth that you have learned. If you are sharing a fact, cite your dang source. Would I love if you also shared the who, what, when, where, and why of the source? Yes, I would, but like let's just start with at least naming where the fact came from. And lastly, question viral facts. Just because something is widely shared, just because it's shared by someone that you respect or you admire or you trust, or someone who looks, walks, and talks like an expert, it does not mean it's true. Take the time to ask, where is this coming from? And who, what, when, where, why. Just saying. The triple nod could be helpful in conversation, but presenting it as something that has been scientifically proven is misleading. And the fact that this claim has been circulating for over a decade without scientific evidence that is easily accessible or existing at all is just wild. It's a reminder to me of why critical thinking is so important. And I reflect on some of the recent news about social media networks no longer doing fact checking. I'm not even saying that they were necessarily doing a great job fact checking, but this idea that we are like moving towards this idea of free speech where there is no fact checking, no like safety net for what's true. It just makes me think about how critically important critical thinking is. Like now more than ever, we must think critically about the information we are presented with. My goal in starting this is to help people navigate the noise and start thinking more critically about information that they come across in their daily lives, that they find out in the wild, so to speak. Because I think we all deserve to be well informed and have the full context when we're forming opinions and making decisions. So thank you for tuning in. This has been Is This Legit? With me, Dr. Kirsten Lee Hill. Remember, question everything, especially the science that makes it to your screens.